Hey everybody, it's Joe, Passion Unchained here. I have a special guest on today. This is going to be an interview that's going to help you dive deep into what is blocking you from building a life you love. And we talk a lot about, of course, building a love life you love, which is a focus that I have in my business right now. So not only will you be able to figure out exactly what's pulling you back, you'll have an opportunity to learn from one of the guys who's influenced me and helped me get past a lot of deep blocks in my life. I'm having Ryan Christensen on one more time. I had an interview with him a few months ago, and unfortunately, the audio was not usable. So you may have seen it, but it is the audio. You weren't able to hear what we were saying clearly at all. So we've redone it, we've revamped it, and I actually like this one a lot better, even besides the audio, because the questions I asked questions I think that get a better answer out of him anyway. So I'm really excited to show this to you. He's a master hypnotist. He helps guys get over their deep issues, and I'm excited. I'm going to let you guys go and enjoy it. Cheers. Well, welcome everybody. Joe from Passion Unchained here. You guys know me. This guy, you might have known from an interview that I did a few months ago, but unfortunately had some technical issues and was not able to get usable audio. So we are now getting this interview take two, if you will, and we're going to get the best from Ryan. Ryan is a master hypnotist, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Awesome. Yeah. So my name is Ryan Christensen from hypnosisformen.com. I'm a master hypnotist. I've been doing this for almost 3 years now. As a hypnotist, before that, I spent 23 years in the intelligence community between the Marine Corps Air National Guard as a contractor in DC doing counterproliferation and counterterrorism. So I've got a very long history in terms of like digging in and figuring out what's going on with things, even when it's not necessarily obvious. And I've kind of transitioned that expertise and that talent set over to the hypnosis world, so I can help men, get down and figure out what's holding them back in all kinds of different areas of their life, get it unfucked, so then they can live the life that they actually want to live.
There's a I imagine there's an interesting skill transfer between intelligence and hypnosis. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, sure. So my technique or my modality, kind of my approach to hypnosis is very different from your typical one. Most hypnotists these days will tend to use hypnosis as a tool to do kind of like affirmations on steroids, if that makes any sense. The idea, the common idea with hypnosis is that we get you in this altered mental state, we get you in a trance, and then you're more suggestible, you're more willing to take on ideas that you might otherwise normally reject. So we get you in hypnosis, and if you're feeling down about yourself, if you've got low self-worth, we tell you how awesome you are and how you can do anything you want. And that gives you this massive pump, and then you go out and do the things you want to do. The problem with that model is that it assumes that all we have to do is add in new good stuff, and that automatically overwrites the old stuff. But in my experience, that's not actually how things work. It'll give you a temporary boost, but as soon as you have contact with reality again and things don't go your way, then all that stuff crumbles because the world proves you wrong. And so it's not a very resilient solution. What I've realized, though, is that all these different self-sabotaging behaviors, all these things holding you back, like they exist for a reason. Like your mind is doing these things on purpose. It's trying to accomplish a particular goal, trying to solve a particular problem. So if we can go down and we can understand what problem that is, what goal your mind is trying to accomplish, right? The problem it's trying to solve and why it's trying to do it this way, then we can help it understand the world in a different way. We can do all the different reframing we need to do and update those beliefs in a certain way so that it's not necessary to do those old behaviors anymore. Most men know what they're supposed to be doing to succeed in life. Most people know what the hell it is they're supposed to be doing. They just can't get themselves to do it. They keep shooting themselves in the foot in a million different ways. So if all I can do is just like, hey, make it so you don't shoot yourself in the foot and don't hold yourself back, odds are you're going to be able to succeed. I don't have to tell you how awesome you are because you'll fix the self-worth issues that are kind of underlying, right? If we figure out why you don't feel you're good enough and we fix that so you feel like you're good enough, you don't have to go do all this other stuff, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. So so a lot of other hypnotists, they're like, let me give you an affirmation and install it directly in your subconscious, and then like all the reasons that you won't be doing things, well, this will be your new belief. And what you found in your experience is that it doesn't, like, if you have an underlying difference in intention, if like part of your mind is intending this and part of your mind is intending this, then you can't just put a band-aid over it. You have to actually solve that discongruency.
Exactly. Pause for just a moment because I've got some audio issues on my end. Unfortunately, I've been using some Bluetooth headset that's
Gotcha.
apparently not working, so I might have to swap over to a different headset. I apologize.
All good.
Okay, there we go. Give me an audio check.
Is it working? 3, 2, 1, check.
We're good. Awesome.
All right.
Sorry.
All right. No, it's all good. I remember during, I believe, our second session, my AirPods were not working super well, and I was nervous about that. And that's something I was actually curious about because I know you also work with guys that English isn't their first language, and if I were to guess, I'd be like, oh, well, that's going to be an issue. But you were like, nah, it's totally fine.
No. So there's a couple of different questions there. There's the number one, like unfucking the things that already exist, and there's the number two, the language question. The language question is actually very easy. If you're able to understand what I'm saying, and you're able to speak in such a way that I can understand you, like that's all we really need, right? Because the process that I use is very much a process of going down into your unconscious mind and discovering what those narratives are and what those beliefs are that are driving these different behaviors, right? Because if you're seeing the same thing over and over again, then it's a deliberate process that's driving that, right? It's not random that you're always nervous when you're going out and talking to a girl. If you don't feel very good about yourself, if you don't think you have, you're not confident, you don't have the self-worth you want, right? You feel like you're not good enough in some way. That's going to drive that nervous system, the anxiety every time you're trying to go up and hit on a girl, right? So there's a deliberate process that drives these. And what I found is that if you can understand that process, if you can understand what's driving that, understand the assumptions and the beliefs that underlie that process, then it's possible to change those components, right? Because often, your mind you've got two different kinds of ways of processing the world on a mental level. You've got your conscious mind, which is that logical, rational part of you, the scientific one, evidence-based, so forth and so on. Then you got your unconscious mind, which is running roughly 90% of your life, and it's running based on emotional reasoning. Now, both of those parts of your mind are making meaning and understanding the world and assigning its own kind of like conclusions to what's happening in the world at all times. So you're making meaning not only on a conscious logical level, but also on that emotional level as well at all times. You have been since the day you were born. Of course, as kids, we're not particularly rational until like 5, 6, 7 years old, right? That doesn't really come on until later in life. So for the first 5, 6, 7 years of your life, the only real way that you have, the only real mechanism you have to make sense of the world is that emotional reasoning system, your unconscious mind, right? And so you're going to get stuff wrong. You're going to draw wrong conclusions and incorrect conclusions and incomplete conclusions from what's happening in the world. The problem is the way that your unconscious mind works is after it creates one of these sets of beliefs, what it thinks about you, what it thinks about the world, how the world works, how you move through the world, that becomes the truth with a capital T, and just basically ignores anything that doesn't match what it already believes. Kind of like confirmation bias, only more so. Confirmation bias on steroids, right? It basically is just like ignoring any evidence that's wrong. And as long as it works well enough to get you through the world, then it doesn't really matter that it's wrong, because it's working good enough. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But of course, it's judging it whether or not it's working based on its own set of criteria, which may not match what you want on a conscious level. So what often happens is your unconscious mind thinks it's doing the right thing for you, helping you out the best it can to give you the best results that it thinks it wants for you, based on its own criteria, and those things are in the way of what you consciously want and desire. So bridging that gap, understanding where that gap exists and why it exists, and kind of like bringing both parts of you on the same page together, integrating that so you can actually move forward together, is fundamentally like the entire purpose of my work.
There's an analogy that comes up when you talk about that. Or I sometimes when I talk about like this subject with people, I use the analogy of a broken arm. Like if you break an arm, usually like if you have a minor thing with your body, you can fix it. Like if you like scrape or like some sort of, even like some major things, you don't really need any intervention to fix it. But if you break your arm, your bones will fuse without any intervention. And we're not talking about like there's all the infections and stuff that'll happen, but your bones will fuse. But if you don't have the splint in the right place, if you don't have your arm like the two pieces or multiple pieces set, then they're gonna heal in a way where your arm's gonna be like crooked or bent or something. And I'm curious if you think that's a good analogy for like how we might go through life.
So I think that there's a few different pieces to that. Like number one, there's a limit to what you can do on your own when it comes to like exploring and fixing your subconscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
For a few different reasons. Like number one, it's actually really hard to get to in a conscious state.
Mm-hmm.
Normally there's something we call the critical factor in hypnosis, which is kind of like that wall between your conscious and your unconscious mind. That's always active when you're in your conscious waking state.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically have to like fight your way through a wall to get down to your unconscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to be both conscious and unconscious at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like only one person can be driving the car at a time, and like you switching back and forth with it, that's incredibly difficult, right? You can get some hints if your unconscious mind is willing to cooperate, but that's kind of the second piece of the problem. Is that if you're constantly at war with yourself, then your unconscious mind kind of doesn't trust your conscious mind as much.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You guys are on different pages, you got different agendas, those agendas are conflicting. Why would it trust you? Especially if you've been through, a lot of really dark times mentally and emotionally, like I have for sure. You know, if you've been in some really dark places, you've been in those places where like life isn't worth it. You've just been in despair, like things are just never going to get better. If you're having those kinds of thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally, you kind of become a threat to yourself in a very real
Mm-hmm.
way. And if you're a threat to yourself and your unconscious mind's primary drive is to keep you breathing, keep you alive, well, now it has to protect you from yourself.
Yeah.
Which means it can't really trust your intentions and what you want to do on a conscious level anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to protect you from that. So its willingness to allow you to make changes down there is incredibly small, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people who are stuck the hardest have the most difficult time trying to do that work on their own because their unconscious mind doesn't trust them, just doesn't give them access. It's really hard to go down there and see. And a lot of times the way we kind of compensate for that is we build up a ego identity, a conscious construct of self that like kind of denies or dismisses or alienates that part of us. It's like, oh, well, this part of me is the lazy part of me and I don't like that part of me, so I hate that part of me and I want to go away. Well, that's just going to exaggerate that conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
in order to do this work down here, you kind of have to let go of some of those presuppositions and some of the construct that you've created for yourself in order to make that kind of that negotiation work, right?
Yeah.
You can't hate yourself and love yourself at the same time. It's hard to have really high self-esteem and really like yourself if there's parts of yourself you despise.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting little conflict that can come into play there. But fundamentally, like, yeah, at some point, there's a limit to what you can do on your own.
Mm-hmm.
What I like to kind of one way I kind of like to look at things now is that oftentimes we'll construct these like mental mazes to keep ourselves trapped in a certain way of doing things. Well, if you're the rat in the maze, it's really hard to find your way out, right? Because you got all these walls, you're moving around, just navigating, and maybe there's not even a door out, right? Maybe you've trapped yourself so hard there's not actually a door out of the maze, right? But if you're on the outside looking in, it's very easy to see how the whole thing's put together. It's very easy to see, oh, well, you just need to turn here, jump over this thing and you're good, right?
Yeah.
So having that third party observer, having somebody that's skilled at unpacking and navigating all these different twists and turns you've got of logic and assumptions and beliefs and emotion and everything else, you can have somebody help guide you out of that maze. If somebody's already made their way out of hell, it's a hell of a lot easier for them to guide somebody else out of hell.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Whereas when you're in the middle of it, it's incredibly hard, especially when you've got all this stuff going on, you got all these different parts of you at war with each other. Like, it's hard to navigate. It's incredibly difficult.
It's difficult.
It's incredibly
it's difficult for sure. Like, yeah. I can just imagine. There's this one particular moment. This was right around the time where I'd start to realize the things that were going on in my childhood. I was actually getting out of them. I was getting off on my medication and everything. And I've talked about it on my channel before. So people who've seen this channel for a while, they'll know that part of my story. And I remember I had just started living on my own for the first time outside of any living programs or whatever. And I was in the car and I remember having this conversation, like it was like in my head, but it was almost like I was talking to my unconscious, and it was like, and I was like, why? And it was saying, why should I trust you? Like, you haven't gotten us, I guess, into any good situations. Like, everything that you've done has just made it worse. Like, why? And I'm like, well, just get, yeah. And I had a conversation with it and was just, and I was like, well, just give me a chance. Like, I've gotten myself out of this last bit and it's been hard, but I know you don't trust me, but give me a chance, and then you'll trust me. Like we'll fix this. Like, yeah, I haven't been good. And after that moment, like there are a couple of moments in my life where I was going through a change. Like one with girls in particular. This is, you work with a lot of guys who are are trying to get better with their love life, as
Mhm.
well as like money and a bunch of other things, but specifically love life, and I do as well. There's this one situation where it was around the time where I started to realize that nice guys finish last, and that you have to be capable, you be kind, but be kind in a strong way, and be kind in a
Yeah.
centered way. And I remember telling myself like, hey, this is I had just broke up with my last with my actually the girl I lost my virginity to, and we had planned to meet up um at a show. It was a show in Albany, New York, and at like
Mhm.
a theater. And we both had tickets, and so I expected her to still come, even though we'd already broken up. And she didn't. And I was like, the whole time I was watching the theater, I was texting her. I was like, "Hey, are you coming? What's going on? Wish you were here." And I remember on my way home, I was driving because it was like a 3 hour drive home, and I was like, I told myself that you're gonna feel like an asshole for a few years, but you have to learn to go for what you want. And you have to
Yeah.
learn. And there are some times where you feel like you feel like you're supposed to do what girls want you to do and just be kind just for the sake of being the nice guy. But
Mhm.
you're gonna not do that, and you might feel like an asshole for a few years. Um,
Yeah, and
and it
that's a
like
very
sorted
interesting
myself out.
dynamic. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
part of that, like, fundamentally, if you feel like who you are is like not good enough or not the right thing, right? You're always going to be trying to figure out who you should be instead, how
Mm-hmm.
you should be acting instead, right? And that's the origin. A lot of the, Mr. Nice Guy kind of behaviors is like, I'm not good enough, so I have to be what this other person wants me to be. I got to give them what they
Mm-hmm.
want in order to like almost purchase the things I need.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you what you want, and you're going to give me what I want instead, in return, right?
Yeah.
Of course, that brings that whole covert contract stuff in from No More Mr. Nice Guy. But setting that aside for a moment, like fundamentally, it's really hard to put yourself and your own needs first when you don't think you're actually worth it, when you
Mm-hmm.
don't actually have good self-esteem. If you don't think that you are valuable as a person and your needs are valuable and valid, it's really, really hard to put yourself first. So one of the first things you have to do is recognize, like, okay, no, I actually deserve to be treated well. I actually deserve to have the
Mm-hmm.
things I want in life, and I don't have to change myself or be anything different in order to get it. That's when you get to start being, it's like, no, okay, I'm going to put myself first. If this person
Mm-hmm.
is not the person that's going to give me what I want and need, then I need to find a different person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which becomes a heck of a lot more possible when you're actually grounded and centered and like, okay, I am valuable, I have worth, and that doesn't depend upon what I'm doing for other people. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
depend upon me acting or being a certain way.
So that sense of self-worth is like key to everything else.
I feel it is, yeah. I think fundamentally the biggest problem that people have to solve is unlocking that, fundamental self-worth and self-value. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you simply do not feel like you are good enough or right as you are, if you feel like you can't succeed in life or get what you want in life as you are, then you're constantly going to be behind the eight ball. You're going to be constantly trying to compensate for your shortcomings or failings or whatever it is, right? You're going to
Mm-hmm.
constantly be trying to be somebody else, anybody else other than who you are. And the interesting thing is, one thing I found is that like people don't allow themselves to have what they feel they don't deserve, right? If you don't deserve it, you don't let yourself have it. You don't let yourself go
Mm-hmm.
for it, right? And if you do get it, you don't let yourself keep it, right? Well, what you deserve in a lot of ways is really dependent upon your value
Mm-hmm.
as a person. So if you think your self worth or your value is low, then you don't deserve much, right? And
Yeah.
so, in order to actually get the things that you want in life, you actually have to feel like you deserve them. In order to deserve them, you have to feel like you're valuable enough to deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
So, it all kind of comes from that sense of self worth and value, and that's
So
that's a tricky thing
letting
to navigate.
yourself, like
Yeah,
opening the door, like if it's coming, you don't like if you almost feel like you haven't like if your value is here and you're getting something that's you feel is worth here, then you feel you might have to compensate for that.
yeah. I have to raise myself. I have to earn it,
Mm,
right? I have to improve my value as a man. I have to like step up my game. I have to lose 20
mm,
pounds. I got to up my fashion, whatever it is, right?
yeah.
And a lot of that stuff is just like fundamentally external validation. You're trying to prove to yourself that you're more valuable than you feel like you are. right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's, oh, if I have the Lamborghini, if I've got the yacht, if I'm popping bottles at the club, then that means that I'm awesome,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I've got this big paycheck, that means that I'm awesome. If I've increased my value as a man, like if I get 6-pack abs, then obviously I'm more valuable as a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all those things are great. They're wonderful marketing that gives you more resources, more capability to do stuff, but that doesn't actually change how you feel about yourself 9 times out of
Mm-hmm.
10.
Yeah, for sure. No, 100%. I feel like it's very girlfriend's opening the door. It's very similar to an experience I had recently. I just made my first $10,000 month, which I'm like super fucking excited about. It was something that, yeah, thank you. Something that I
That's
wanted to
awesome.
do for like years. It reminds me of like all the times I've been homeless and like not knowing. Like I literally been kicked out of hostels because I wasn't paying. Like hostels that cost €5 a night. Like this is almost nothing because
Yep.
I didn't know I didn't have any money to pay, and
Right.
like here I am making $10,000 a month. And I celebrated it for a weekend and really enjoyed myself, and bought a few nice things for myself, stuff that like I still had extra money to put away and stuff, and I celebrated. And then 3 days later I'm like, oh fuck, like now I have to make this, or now I have to make my next $10,000 month. And I was just like, all of a sudden, I was like, just moving the goalposts and in the same
Right.
exact place of dissatisfaction as I was before. And I was like, oh crap, like, hold on a second. I had enough knowledge and understanding, and probably like our hypnosis helped instill in my mind,
Mhm.
like, oh, hold on, here's a thing, here's a pattern. Um,
Yep.
but I was like, hold on a second, like this is right where I was before. If this doesn't make me happy, then nothing will, which means I have to figure out happiness on its own. It doesn't mean don't
Yes.
pursue goals. Pursue goals for the goal's sake, but don't pursue goals for happiness sake, because that will
Right.
never, yeah, it will never like make me happy. And so since that realization, I instantly like it took a few days of like rebalancing, but I've felt like actually centered and actually happy, like in my own skin, like regardless of what's going on. I'm like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like happiness is something I can find anywhere, anytime.
Well, there's a few different interesting pieces of this. Like, number one, this idea that you can make yourself happy or prove yourself wrong or something like
Mm-hmm.
that from the outside in. Like, how do you prove feelings?
Mm-hmm.
How do you
Yeah.
prove a feeling right? How do you prove a feeling wrong? Like, feelings are not evidence-based things. They don't give a fuck
Mm-hmm.
about facts. So, like Ben Shapiro's got that saying, facts don't care about your feelings, and it's true.
Yeah.
What's logically true, empirically true, factually true is true, regardless of how you feel about it. But the
Mm-hmm.
opposite is also true, and that feelings don't give a fuck about your facts.
Yeah. True.
Right?
Very
How many
true.
times have you had this, like a girlfriend or whatever, be like hysterical about something? It's like, this is not a big deal. I don't know why you're just like, stop being upset. It's not that big a deal. Like, logically,
Yeah.
this is no big deal. And they're like, that doesn't make a damn bit of difference, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is, like, all of this, the success gurus and money Twitter and everything else and all the popular advice is like, oh, if you do these things, then you'll
Mm-hmm.
feel happy, right? You'll prove to yourself that you're
Yeah.
wrong, and you'll have self-confidence because you've done these things and so forth and so on. And fundamentally, you'll prove yourself wrong. You'll prove yourself these emotions wrong, and then you can be happy. It's like, well, that's not actually how it fucking works, right?
No, not at all.
Because what happens is you hit the goal, and all of a sudden you don't feel happy, you don't feel fulfilled, you don't feel
Yeah.
changed, and you're like, oh, well, if that wasn't enough, then I need to do something else,
Yeah. Something more.
right? And so you just get on this treadmill of like constantly moving the goalpost further and further out,
Yeah.
trying to prove yourself wrong over and over again, until
Yeah.
you realize that that doesn't work. And happiness is something that is generated within. It's not something that comes from the outside in. Something comes from the inside out. And the same
Yep.
thing with self-worth,
Yep.
right? If your self-worth is based on external validation, then you don't actually control your self-worth. Your
Mm-hmm.
self-worth is determined by other people, other things, the external world.
Mm-hmm.
Self-worth should be self-determined.
Mm-hmm.
I should be the judge of that, nobody else. I should be the judge of how I
Yeah.
feel about myself, nobody else, and nothing else, right? And once you get to the place where you are actually determining your own self-worth, when you're actually are your own mental point of origin, truly,
Mm-hmm.
when you have that internal locus of control, it doesn't fucking matter what's happening in the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's all just logistical challenges, engineering problems to solve. Like, how do I get the resources to get the thing that I want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making $10,000 a month doesn't say anything about who I am as a person. It's just a testament to my skill as a businessman. It's a testament to my
Mm-hmm.
skill as a photographer, my creative, whatever it is, right? My marketing skill, whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my worth isn't determined by whether or not I've got a supermodel on my arm or not,
Mm-hmm.
right? My value isn't determined by the kind of woman I have in my life. kind of woman I have in my life is determined by what I want in a woman
Mm-hmm.
and what I want in a partner, not based on
Mm-hmm.
how anybody else sees that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can just be happy doing nothing. If I can be equally happy drinking Mai Tais on a beach as a surfer bum for the rest of my life or changing the world,
Mm-hmm.
like, how can you screw with somebody that can do that?
Yeah, which one do you want? You just go for the
So
one
it's
that you
just a good
want.
thing. It's just a choice at that
Yeah.
point. Just a
Yeah, and
choice
then
at
you
that point.
you achieve it, and it's not like you achieve it just by doing the things. And like if it's just about the thing itself and not about an emotional extra thing, then it's smooth sailing. Like, yeah, it might be difficult. Like, I
Yeah.
did fail for 8 years at business before I got to this point, and I'm going to fail a lot more until I get to the next points that I want to get to.
Right.
But I like, and there are a lot of mental blocks along the way, but without any of the mental blocks, it's just like, okay, well, this is a logistical problem to solve. It's not anything else, anything more than that.
It turns into something where failing at business or failing at an endeavor or failing at a job or failing at trying to hit on this girl doesn't mean that you are a failure.
Mm.
Right? Because normally it's like, oh, I failed at the thing I was trying to do. I am a failure. It's like, no, I'm fine. Didn't figure that out. Didn't do that
Mm-hmm.
right. Something happened, whatever it is. It's an external thing that occurs, not a testament to who you are as a person.
Mm.
And that changes things massively. Right? If I can go bankrupt and still feel perfectly fine with who I am,
Mm-hmm.
right? If my self-worth doesn't change based on my financial situation or my dating situation or my fitness or whatever, that's incredibly powerful. I mean, you see all these guys who are like, military guys who base their entire identity on their worth on their military career, and they get out of the military and they've got nothing anymore and they just implode.
Mm-hmm.
Business guys who are successful entrepreneurs, they stop being entrepreneurs, they retire,
Mm-hmm.
they're done, right? There's no more mountains to climb, no more of that external validation that they can chase, that they're not getting that external hit. They don't have that external framework to hold on to. If they don't actually have it internalized, if they don't have that internal locus of control, if their self-worth is not self-determined, they fall apart. And you see this stuff happen all the freaking time. So it's
Powerful.
incredibly important to get to that point where it's like, no, I decide my self-worth. Who I am as a person doesn't change based on the external reality, based on the external events. Now, that stuff is a good mirror and compass, right? Of like, oh, I'm not actually making the money I need to change so I can get the resources I need to do the things I want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm not acting in the way that I feel is just congruent or that I should, in which case I need to change my actions, right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to impact your value as a person. It doesn't have to impact your self-worth. It doesn't have to impact what you deserve, right? And the thing is, once you deserve, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's all right. Do you feel like the question that's coming up for me is, do you feel like people by default have a high sense of value, but things get in the way of that? Or do you feel like people have to, by default, find a high sense of self-value?
That's an excellent question. Keep in mind that everybody that's coming to me feels they have a problem. So there's a selection bias there, right?
Like
but fundamentally,
asking a therapist how crazy people are. It's like, it's very crazy.
They're very, very. There's a lot of crazy people out there because I see them all the time, right? But
yeah,
I think that fundamentally, it's hard for me to picture a person who has gone through life and gotten everything right to a point where they have that innate sense of self-worth and they didn't have to work to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think that because you're spending the first 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years of your life just kind of like reacting on instinct and reacting emotionally and everything else, you're going to come up with all these different bad conclusions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you've got a perfect family that's loving and supportive, I had one client who's like, his family was great, but his school environment, his peers, complete assholes. Mm. Sometimes the school environment is supportive, but home life isn't good. Right? Maybe you've got a supportive home life, maybe you've got supportive peers, but I've had one guy who grew up in a rich family, but like he could just never really measure up to his brother. So he was always second place to that. And that was enough to mess him up. Right. So it's hard for me to imagine a scenario like the number of people who come through with like truly good self-esteem from the beginning and never have to work on it. I think it's probably very small. I think that in general, we've got to, it's a process to get to the point where we can be self-determined,
Mm-hmm.
where we actually have that internal sense of self-worth that's not dependent upon the external reflectors, right?
Mm.
I think a lot of people who have, high self-worth, high self-esteem have done the process of, let me go ahead and prove it from the outside in. And so on a conscious
Mm-hmm.
level, they have that. They've got this ego identity of like, I'm amazing and so forth and so on. But you see a lot of self-destructive behaviors play out kind of under the surface,
Mm-hmm.
which means there's still that mismatch between their conscious self and their unconscious self. I think those are
Yeah,
probably, that's one of the most dangerous situations to be in,
because the
because
higher
if
you
it's,
are, the higher it is to fall.
yeah, the higher you go, the farther the fall, right? And you're
Mm-hmm.
also like, um, just there's that system where if it's just an ego construct and reality comes in and smacks you down, you're toast,
Yeah.
right? If the world all of a sudden does not agree with you, that you're awesome, you're toast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's all just facade, it's all just illusion, you know. There's a great, I talk about this guy Alex Hermosi all the time. For those of you who are
Yep.
not familiar, he's an entrepreneur, businessman, sales guy, a huge following on YouTube. Great sales guy. He's got amazing content. Love the guy to death. And he did this little YouTube short a while back where he's talking about, he had a lot of insecurity growing up, right? At the time he was made this video, he and his wife were pulling in 100 million a year in revenue through a portfolio of companies that they built from scratch. And he's in his mid 30s, nine
It's
figures a
pretty damn
year,
good.
mid 30s, right? And he's talking about how because of all of his success, his insecurity has gotten 30% better. 30% improvement, 100 million a year. That is an incredibly bad ROI, right? And he
Yeah.
went on to say it's like the only reason it's that much better is because he's got this great big fuck off pile of money he can point to and use as an emotional crutch, right? And it's like, oh my god, like how sad is it that somebody who is that successful, that fucking good at what he does, who is doing everything right, still can't fix this underlying insecurity and still has
Mm-hmm.
to keep on going bigger and higher and bigger and higher and bigger and higher to try and fix that. Like it's kind of sad, you know?
Yeah. No, for sure. I did the same thing with my love life.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily have like a world class love life, but I've been with more girls than most guys will get within a
Yep.
lifetime. And I had some pretty crazy experiences. I've talked about them on my channel, some of them. And
Mm-hmm.
um, there was a moment where I was actually in coaching, and the the guy who Andy, I've had him on my podcast
Mm-hmm.
before. He kept saying, like, "Oh, Joe, like he's gone through a lot of experience. He's super experienced. Like, look to him for advice." And I'm like, "Me, super experienced? That I don't know what I'm doing with girls at all." And then he's like, "What are you talking about? Like, if I look on paper, like you have a ton of experience. What's going on there?" And I was like, and it's over. It took like a year or two of like him and everybody in the group being like, "Oh, Joe, you're like really good with girls." I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" They're like, "Oh shit, like it's not. I'm just trying to explain this feeling of not being enough,
Yes.
and this feeling of not. I've the first step is I feel like I'm not enough, and the second step is why is that, and the third step is, oh, it's because I'm not good at this, and the fourth step is, well, let me get better at this, but it never changes the feeling. So
Right.
the it might my explanation for it might change. Like I used to be 100 pounds heavier. I have stretch marks all over my body, not like some of my arms, but you can't really see them. It's mostly
Mm-hmm.
like under my shirt and stuff. Um, but I lost that weight, and then it took like 2 years of people constantly telling me like, "Oh wow, like you're looking great. Like what? You must be like super attractive, getting all the girls." And I'm like, "What are you
Oh
talking
no.
about? Like I'm fat." And I actually
Right.
like almost got anorexic to a point where it's like, but in the end, it's just like there's this feeling of I'm not enough, and that was my explanation of why I felt that way.
Right, right. It's this very interesting process where you're like, okay, you feel like you're not enough. You feel like there's something wrong. You feel like there's something wrong with you. So you look for the thing that's wrong. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's because I'm fat. Great. Let me fix being fat. Oh, wait, I don't feel different. Cool. Okay. So what's wrong? Oh, well, I'm not making enough money. Let me make money. Great. So I don't feel
Yeah.
like I'm enough. Like the feeling is still there. That must not be the problem. What's the problem now? Oh, I don't have enough girls. Great. So get good at that. Still feel the same way. Like, what's wrong
Yeah.
now? And you just end up like playing on this treadmill of like fixing things and fixing things and fixing things and fixing things and fixing things. And all these things are great. because they're gaining you new skills and new capabilities, and like you're getting healthier and you're more popular and you have more people in your life, and all those things are wonderful.
Hmm.
But it doesn't change the feeling. And you're on this
Yeah.
constant treadmill trying to figure out, okay, what the hell is it that I need to fix? What the
What's
hell is
wrong with
wrong
me?
with me? What the hell is
Yeah.
wrong with me that I still feel this way? And you're never going to figure that out from the outside in, because it's not a logical thing. It's an emotional thing. So you got to get down to the level of where those emotions are generated and where all that stuff's coming
Hmm.
from to figure that out.
Hmm.
And it may
So that's
very
where
well
hypnosis
be
comes in.
that's where hypnosis comes in. That's where hypnosis comes in, because that's hypnosis gives us access to your unconscious mind in a much more pure, unfiltered, direct way,
Yeah.
right? Because if your mind is doing this stuff on purpose, it knows exactly why it's doing it. It knows exactly why it feels like you're not good enough or there's something wrong with you or whatever that might be.
Yeah. Because this happened, and that means that I felt this way about myself. And then you're like,
Yes.
oh,
Oh,
let's fix
cool.
that.
Let's fix that, right?
Yeah.
Because if the problem is like, oh well, like I've worked with some of the guys who've been through like physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and it's like, oh well, those things happen. It means like there must be something wrong with me because this stuff happens. Like, well, that's not
Hmm.
true, and here's why that's not true.
Hmm.
It's like, oh well, I'm powerless, I'm weak because I couldn't stop myself from getting hurt. It's like, well, that's kind of true because you're right, you couldn't. You're a kid, nothing you could do to stop that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're powerless or weak because you've survived that.
Yeah.
And sometimes just fucking being able to survive a situation that you have no choice over is a win.
Mm.
And you start doing those different reframes and just changing the meaning around those events. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, I wasn't powerless or weak. I did the best I could.
Mm.
There's nothing actually wrong with me. I was just in a shitty situation.
Mm.
Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, if I was just in a shitty situation, I did the best I could and I survived it and I made it through and I'm fine, then there's nothing really wrong with me. If there's nothing really wrong with me, then it's not that I'm not good enough, because there's nothing actually wrong with me. It's like, okay, well, now I have value.
Hmm.
At which point it's an interesting exploration. It's like, okay, I've got value. Like, how much value do I have? And then you can go down that rabbit hole, figuring out, okay, let's get you some good self-esteem now,
Yeah.
so that you can actually feel like you're good enough and feel like you're worthy and feel like you deserve stuff. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, poof. Then all of a sudden you feel worthy, you deserve stuff, and none of that shit's an issue anymore,
For sure.
because you've actually explored and figured out where it came from. You actually fixed that, and now that that's fixed, now that those stories have changed, things mean different things. The same things
Mm.
means different, right? One of the most common things I see with my clients is after doing a session with them, it's like, okay, so you're thinking back all this crap, you're thinking about when you get bullied in school and your mom didn't love you and dad left you and all this sort of stuff. It's like, how do you feel about that? And it's like, that doesn't really matter.
Yep. Yeah.
Doesn't
That
really
we've
matter.
done
It's like,
that.
doesn't really matter. It's like, okay, so you mean the stuff that's been bugging you your entire life, that's been massive fucking weight on your shoulders, and you've been crying and moaning and pissing and moaning and whining, complaining about for like 30 years, like all of a sudden that doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, cool.
Yeah. No, I've had that experience with you a few times.
Yeah. And it's
Um,
crazy because one thing
Real
that
quick,
go
the
for
free. So I'm a little cheapskate, and I haven't paid for Zoom
it.
Pro, and so we have 2 more minutes on this. I love the flow we're going. I hate to mess it up, but I'd rather do it on purpose than for it to be done to us.
Sure.
So
Go ahead and restart the meeting. Yep.
yeah, okay, cool.
Cool.
And we are back in progress. So you were talking about how when you go through the hypnosis and you
Mhm.
find all the things that were going on, you're like, and then you start putting the pieces back together. And at the end, a lot of clients are like, oh my God, I'm not even thinking about that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so a lot of people focus really heavily on the emotional experience that they have in relation to stuff. And that's because that's what the experience that they have, right? That's the biggest like pain point, is like all this negative emotion that they don't want to fucking deal with, and it's massively painful and they don't want to deal with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, one of the biggest things I've discovered over the past couple of years working through this and kind of developing my own methodology is that the emotions are always driven by what those things mean, right? So, like,
Yeah.
your girlfriend breaks up with you, and that means that you're not good enough and you're never going to find love. And that's why it's so freaking painful, right? So, the
Mm-hmm.
emotions, in a lot of ways, are just signals from your unconscious mind to your conscious mind about how it's interpreting an event or emotion, moment in time, or the world
Mm-hmm.
around you, right? And so it's like, okay, this is I'm perceiving a threat in the environment of some kind. So I'm going to make you feel anxious and afraid
Mm-hmm.
so that you respond to the world around you in a way that it feels you should, right? Well, that's great if there's actually a threat in the environment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you're feeling anxious and afraid because you're about to walk up to a girl and say hello to her, maybe that's not actually the appropriate response, but that's
Mm-hmm.
driven by a particular interpretation by your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
approach anxiety, fear of judgment, right? To me, those aren't actually fears of judgment. The problem is, you suck. And so if you go up there, she's going to see that you suck. So you're not afraid of being judged. You already know the outcome.
Yeah.
There's no question. Like, she's going to realize that you suck if you go up and talk to her. That's why you feel anxious and afraid, because you don't want that self-perception to be confirmed. So the fear of judgment isn't fear of being judged. The fear of judgment is knowing the outcome and not wanting to experience the emotion associated with that outcome, right?
And it's anticipation.
It's the anticipation of that existing,
the thing that you
the
think
thing
is
that
going
you're
to
afraid
happen.
of. Yeah, exactly. So if that's the case, then as you do this work to go down and figure out like what are driving these different emotional responses, and you're changing the content and the meaning around those things, all of a sudden the emotional content and the emotional response to those things change as well, right? So if you go from being like powerless and weak because you couldn't protect yourself as a kid to, no, I'm a freaking rock because nothing can touch me, all of a sudden all that negative emotion that was driven by that idea that you're powerless, that you're weak, and that you can't protect yourself goes away, because you're no longer powerless and weak and you can't protect yourself, right? So the emotions themselves are not important. The emotions are just signals of what your unconscious mind, or how your unconscious mind is interpreting the world, right? So in a lot of ways, like, pain points the way. Fear and anxiety and those feelings of worthlessness and so forth and so on are just signals that, hey, there's something wrong here. Pay attention, go fix it. Right? So a lot of times those negative emotions are like, okay, you're feeling this like anxiety and fear when you're going up to these women to say hello. Okay, great. Why? Well, it's like, well, I don't feel like I'm good enough. Great, let's fix that. I don't care about your anxiety. Your anxiety is irrelevant, right? Your anxiety is just a message that says, hey, your unconscious mind is saying that you're not good enough to get this thing. Cool. Let's go focus on the you're not good enough piece. Because if I can fix you're not good enough, then you won't feel anxious, which means you can go do the thing you want to do. Right? So the emotions themselves aren't important in and of themselves. The emotions are just signals or signs that point the way to where the problem began and where a problem lies. And by going down to that very root cause level, going back to the way that your mind is interpreting and making meaning of the world, and changing how it's interpreting the world, changing how it's interpreting the events of your past, changing how it views yourself, opens up a hell of a lot more possibilities.
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest things for me with our session was, I don't even remember what it was, but there are a couple of things. One of them was feeling like it was feeling like I was always in survival mode, and I was able to that one had a very quick, like, one thing I've noticed about the hypnosis is that like the feeling will be changed immediately, but like it'll take a few weeks to like a month, or even like I'm still seeing like changes, but like the actual changes in my life will propagate out slowly. Like it's not an immediate. It's almost like, this is funny because this is something I've been doing a self-hypnosis thing on for the past 3 weeks. I actually just changed my like new affirmation. But I've been it's almost like the roots. There's this affirmation that's connected to the one I did. It's not the exact one I did, but the roots create the fruits. And the way that like our blueprint for what we have, how the world works, and how our life works, and our self-worth and everything leads to our feelings, which leads to our thoughts. Or no, the blueprint leads to the thoughts, which leads to the feelings, which leads to the actions, which leads to the results. And so if you change the blueprint, it doesn't immediately like, cool, like everything in your life is now perfect. It's like it propagates down the line. And I've noticed that like I'll have an immediate sense of relief, and then over the next like weeks and months, things will develop to the point of I'll be in the place where I want to be.
Yeah. So a lot of it's very interesting in that you're right. There's this kind of like propagation effect that happens, because you can't really know what's changed sitting in your house by yourself.
Yeah.
You really can't, right? You kind of have to go out in the world and experience things and have these challenges that used to like really bother you, and realize, wait a second, that guy said this thing and it doesn't actually fucking faze me. Interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Or like, I had this desire to go talk to this person, I just went up and talked to him, and there was no anxiety, there was no fear. Interesting. Right? Or I just wanted to do this thing and I did it. Or like, I usually feel obligated to talk to this guy and do what this guy wants, but now I'm just like not.
Yeah.
Right? And so you need that interaction with the outside world to kind of force yourself to begin to act in different ways, which confirms to yourself how you've changed. It's like evidence,
Mm.
And it also
Yeah.
is like, this is an iterative process. In a lot of ways, you're peeling back layers of the onion. You don't know exactly how much there is work to do, how many things need to shift in order to really get you where you want to be. So a lot of the process is we do some work, and I say, go fucking do shit. Go out in the world, do some things, see what happens, right? And you'll notice that a lot
Yeah.
of the stuff is easy, but there's this one thing that's still a problem. Great. If this one thing's still sticky, there's still something there that's not resolved, hasn't been fixed. There's some issues still there that we need to explore. So we go and we fix that, and it's all right. Go try it again. That works. Awesome. What else you got? Nothing. Bon appetit. Have fun. Enjoy your life.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a unique
But
thing about your like package. It's like, I don't even know if it's package. It's just package where you're like, cool. What are your issues? And then and then like what I did and what
mhm.
I imagine you're sitting with clients is you'll be, oh, cool. I'm having an issue with this, and this. You're like, okay, cool. So I think it'll be about this many sessions, but we'll just, if you have problems with this, then I'll just fix it until you're good.
Yeah. Fundamentally, I don't like charging for individual sessions, because then it's like, if you don't feel like you're making progress and you don't want to come out back and continue, and like if you've only got so many financial resources, I can only pay for this much and I'm kind of screwed. I'd rather just say, okay, look, here's the problem set that we need to work on. Here's what it's going to cost to deal with this. And then you pay that money, and then you and I work together until it's done, because we don't know what's down there. We don't know how complicated things are. We don't know how knotted up stuff is, right? We don't know how complex the maze is that we need to navigate out of. And so because I don't know how much work it's going to take, it doesn't make any sense for me to say, okay, well, it's going to take 5 sessions or 10 sessions or whatever. Like, I can guess based on the experience I have working with hundreds of clients from all around the world, but I'm not going to know until we get down there, right? And it may very well be that this stuff is easy, but this stuff here is like really knotted up and hard, and it takes us 3 or 4 sessions just to navigate this one freaking thing. So be it, right? I don't want you to be in a situation where you are like not feeling like you're making the progress you need and having to keep paying into a process that you don't like, because that's the experience that frustrates the shit out of everybody, right? Is when you're paying money and paying money and paying money and nothing changes, you feel like you're getting ripped off. You feel like you're getting scammed, right? And that's not something that I want my clients to be feeling.
No,
so I'd rather say, so look, pay my fee and we're going to work together until it's fixed. And I don't care how long that takes. I've had guys where they had every single issue you had. We fixed them in 2 sessions. Everything was done in 2 sessions. I've had guys where we're on session 5 or 6 and we're still working through some naughty stuff. Some things that are really tied up and really kind of sticky for them. Right. Yeah. One guy, I'm on like number 8, because this guy is just like so locked up in this one concept and framework that he's built. It's like, it's really hard to break him out of that. And so sometimes, if it's taken guys a long time to break out of something, I may say, okay, you need to do something else first, and then we can go back and fix this, because there's like something that's in the way that's not really conducive to hypnosis working on it right now. Maybe you need to do some plant medicine. Maybe you need to talk to a psychologist or a psychiatrist and do some just like standard therapy. Maybe it's your conscious frameworks that are in the way, right? So we need to adjust this before we can actually adjust this thing down here.
It's like a game of Rush Hour with all the cars.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows what we need to shift around to get you where you want to be? And we're not going to know that until we get into it, right? But the other thing is like one thing I've realized in my own journey is that after I did all this work to shift my subconscious beliefs and everything else and get that self-worth and that self-determination, it's like, okay, great. Now all the conscious models I have of the world about like what relationships should be and what my business life should be and how I should be living my life, those don't actually fit with who I am now. So it's been an interesting thing. It's like, okay, cool. Like none of this stuff actually fits who I am now. So I now need to go out and get new models and new decision matrices so I can figure out, okay, what actually works for who I am now and where I'm going in the world. Because the stuff that I have available to me that I've been using to navigate up until this point doesn't really work anymore. So it's a really interesting, like kind of iterative process where you like fix all the stuff inside yourself, and now you need new conscious models, and maybe you have to fix some more stuff and then models, and just like, but rather than being just like a straight line journey with an endpoint, it becomes just like this infinite cycle of improvement.
Sure.
Right. Which is very, very different from, oh, I just need to hit this finish line, and then I need to make another finish line and another finish line and another finish line, another finish line.
There's never really a finish line, and whenever you expect life to just clean up like that, it always does a little, it always just like does like dodges and just kind of tags you on the back or something. It's like life's supposed to be a process, although I can go into the weeds here, but there's David Data, he has the book of The Way of the Superior Man, and always he talks about how like the masculine just wants to be like da 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 and then like complete, and then the feminine is like, but this, it's like the feminine wants to have the conversation. It wants to have
Sure.
the dynamic and the cycle, and the masculine just wants to be cool. So I've done. I want to move on and be empty and just be like clear. And so I feel like life is almost like the feminine just being like, well, let's have a conversation like that. You thought it was finished, but let's bring this up, and it's kind of like a
Well,
dance.
here's the thing. The other thing is that the masculine always needs that next thing to do. You
True.
know, if the masculine is that penetrative force, we like to do stuff, we like to act, we like to create, we like to, fix things, all that sort of stuff. So there's no more problems. Like, what do you do? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that once you kind of like fix a lot of the stuff, like that drive to like constantly be doing and constantly be improving, constantly be fixing things kind of
Mm-hmm.
goes away because you realize I don't really have anything I have to fix about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now it just becomes like, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
What do I want to do? I want to do this. Cool. I'm going to go do that. I want to
Yep.
create a business. I'm going to go do that. That got boring. I'm going to go do this other thing instead. So you go do that. Right. And there's no like friction, no ego stuff caught up in that. You just get to be who you are
Mm-hmm.
and do what you want to do because it's what you choose to do, which to
Yeah. The
me sounds a lot more
phrase.
interesting. Yeah. Freedom is
Yeah.
amazing.
The phrase that you brought up the first time we tried to do the interview was freedom of action. Is you're
Hmm.
trying to get to that freedom, and I really like that phrase for what you're looking to
Yeah.
achieve.
Total freedom of choice and total freedom of action, because those are two different things, right? Because fundamentally, you first need to be able to choose freely for yourself the life you're going to live, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means not decided by anybody else. Like, you don't have to be a doctor because your parents don't want you to be a doctor. You don't have to be spinning plates because that's what all the red pill
Mm-hmm.
guys say, whatever that happens to be. You don't have to have a kids and family because that's what traditional people say. You can have
Mm-hmm.
a friends, kids and family, even though red people say you shouldn't, all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? You got to be able to choose freely for yourself what actually is going to be good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've chosen your path, you need to be able to act freely to achieve that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that all of your friction ends up being external stuff rather than internal. So on the
Mm-hmm.
inside, you're all fully aligned, you're all on the same page, you're all moving in the same direction. You don't have to fight yourself to make things happen. All the problems are out there rather than in here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because at that
Yeah.
point, it just becomes an engineering problem. It's like, how do I make the thing happen?
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
And
And
that's
that's
a
where
lot
the
easier.
masculine excels. Yes, yes, yes. So yeah, total freedom of choice, total freedom of action is what I'm looking for, looking at creating for my clients. And it doesn't take long to do.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't. It could be hard work because you're gonna have to I'm gonna be challenging a lot of shit for you. You're gonna have to look at some uncomfortable things that you don't like about yourself, and it's not gonna be necessarily the easiest thing in the world, but it can be.
Mm-hmm.
If you're ready for it, if you're ready to do it, and you're 100% invested in the process, like it can go fast, as you've experienced. Like it can go
Yeah.
really freaking fast. So why not get to that point? Why not stop fighting yourself? Why not make it easier on yourself for once?
Yeah. For sure. This has been great, man. I feel like we could go on forever, and I don't see why we can't dive into a different topic some other time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
How do
Yeah, just let me
people,
know.
for sure, how do people get in touch with you if they want to work with you?
So my website is hypnosisformen.com. You can also go to menshypnosis.com. That's more of a funnel starter thing that kind of lays out exactly my process and everything else. Either of those websites will allow you to set up a initial consultation with me. It's a 45-minute call. It's free. Sit down and go over like what sort of challenges you got, what you're working on, where you're trying to go, see like what kind of things might be holding you back and how I might be able to help you. And if it's a good fit, then we'll just start working on from there. Like I said, it could be one session, it could be 10 sessions. It doesn't really matter. I charge a flat fee and we just work together until it's done. I don't care how complex the problem is. We're going to work together until it's fixed.
All right. And I've worked with you. So for people that have been watching this, I like to have people on, but I admire them. And I might not have worked with them directly, although most of them, pretty much all of them I have. But yeah, I'm definitely much better off after our session. So I'm very grateful for that.
I'm really glad to see it, man.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.